Hello and welcome to Valley Girls, the bi-weekly podcast exploring everything there is to see, do, try, eat, and experience in New York's Hudson Valley by talking to the makers, the doers, the growers, the creators, and all the unique voices of the Hudson Valley. I'm Jenny Leifer.
And I'm Jennifer Santiago, and together as the Valley Girls, we're telling the Hudson Valley story one episode at a time. We're so happy you're here.
In our first 2 seasons of the podcast, we've covered legendary Hudson Valley people and events like the artist Thomas Cole, the O Positive Festival, the annual Saugerties Artist Studio Tour, and the Scenic Hudson Conservancy. And we've had brushes with local royalty like our baking queen, Enrica Martin, the author, Sari Botton, and the iconic Bannerman Castle. But today's guest is divine. We are talking to Debbie Giaquindo, also known as the Hudson Valley Wine Goddess. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
So we did a little project last year. We put out our very first ebook. It's just a small guide that we have on Amazon. It's called 10 Great Dates in New York's Hudson Valley. But so after Jenny published it, it takes a couple of days to show up on Amazon. And so, of course, I was anxiously Googling us every day and going into Amazon and searching. And so our book wasn't up yet, but I came across your book and I was very excited. And I was like, we're getting her on the podcast. So you have a book called Topping the Hudson Valley, Day Trips and Weekend Itineraries, visiting the wineries, breweries, cideries, and distilleries in the Hudson Valley and the sites along the way. So we love wine. We love weekends. We love day trips. We love the Hudson Valley, so we want you to tell us everything. But maybe we can start with just how you got into wine generally and how you got into Hudson Valley wine specifically.
Okay, so I got into wine. It was actually me and my husband back in the 90s. I feel really old. My husband was told to lay off the hard stuff and to drink beer and wine. So I went to the liquor store and bought a bottle of Rioja. Had no idea what I was buying. I didn't even know what made me reach for this bottle. And that was the beginning to where I am now, was all on that bottle. So that's how I got into wine. And we wanted to know more about wine. It just evolved from there. And how with the Hudson Valley, now I'm a native, I was born in New York City, lived the first 10 years of my life in Rochelle, and then moved up to Wappingers Falls when I was 10. So I lived in the Hudson Valley for the majority of my life. And I started back in 2006, I think it was, I started my wine blog. And let me backtrack a little bit. I had a travel agency called Personal Touch Travel and Exclusive Wine Vacations. And I had a booth at the Hudson Valley Wine Festival, the second year that we were, I think, in Red Hook at the time. And I've been with the Hudson Valley Wine Festival ever since, but that's another story. So I had this booth for my exclusive wine vacations, sending people all over for wine. And next to me was Michael Migliori at White Cliff Vineyards. And here I had lived in the Hudson Valley most of my life, and I've never heard of him. And I'm like, here I am, somebody into wine. Why haven't I heard of you? I knew Brotherhood, I knew Millbrook. Those were the 2 wineries, Rivendell, which is now Ribeiro. So I'm like, I haven't heard about you. And one thing led to another. And honestly, he became my mentor with Hudson Valley Wines. That's how I got involved with the Schwungok Wine Trail and eventually Hudson Valley Wine Country. I was in charge of, where he was really my mentor. And I learned so much. I mean, we live in the Hudson Valley is an area, I call it the craft beverage mecca, because you have wonderful wineries, wonderful breweries, wonderful distilleries, wonderful cideries, and some pretty famous ones too. It's the home of the oldest continuously operated winery, Brotherhood, and the oldest vineyard, which is Slate Hill Vineyards at Benmoral Winery. And you don't find that in other regions. And you have just wonderful ciders. The apples are, when you think of cider, it's not just McIntosh apples. It's indigenous apples that are just used for cider that have very odd names, and they're grown throughout the Hudson Valley. And that's probably why Angry Orchard moved down to the Hudson Valley.
That's amazing.
So,
Growing up in the Hudson Valley, I always knew there were a handful of wineries, but it seems like in the past couple decades, it has really become a scene like you're talking about. A
oh
cider
yeah,
distilleries that have popped up. I feel like I learn about a new local distillery brand every time I scroll through Instagram. It's like all of a sudden there's some that I haven't
yeah.
heard of. So it's not just my perception then. This scene has really taken off in the Hudson Valley.
Oh, it's huge. It
Yeah.
is really huge, and I think there is something for everybody. There really is. And a lot of the wineries, when you go out wine tasting, maybe not everybody likes wine, but some of the wineries interchange with other craft beverage producers, so you'll be able to get something else there. Maybe it's a beer or a cider. Um, I don't know. Every winery is different, or well, what they do, but they do try to work together.
Mm.
I mean, the valley, it's just, and what's pretty big when you look at that's a valley, it spans probably 100 miles. And no matter what corner of the Hudson Valley you're in, there is something there for you, whether it's wine, whether it's beer, whether it's cider, whether it's vodka or bourbon.
So we're going to come back to cider and the spirits. I really like cider and I want to know more about that. But just sticking to wine for the moment, it's so I don't mean to be a wine snob, and I'm not at all. I am not super knowledgeable about wine, and we're gonna talk about whether or not that matters. But I know one of the things that people talk about with wine is terroir, that there's a certain something about where the wine is grown that if you're really knowledgeable, you can tell the difference. So, is that a thing? Like, what is unique about the Hudson Valley, climate-wise or whatever, that makes Hudson Valley wines different and special?
Well, every region, wherever grapes are grown, the terroir is going to be different. So if you like Cabernet Sauvignon, I'll use.
I do.
I do.
And,
Yes.
you drink California because that's probably one of the first Cabernet Sauv that you had was something from California. And then you drink a New York Cab. It's going to be completely different because the growing area is different. The soil, terroir, the soil that the grapes are grown in, the climate. Is it cool? Is it very, very hot? Which will also dictate what time the grapes are picked at. So what is the Brix level, which is the sugar level? So like in California, you might have a Brix level of 24, 25 in the Cabernet Sauvignon. On the East Coast, say in Hudson Valley or Long Island, you might only have 21 Brix, 22 Brix. And so it's going to taste, the grape is the same, but what the terroir and what the soil is going to be completely different. And the weather, and if it's rainy, if it's really, really hot, all that put together into the bottle is really what makes the wine.
So how micro are we talking about? So I know obviously everything you say makes sense. California and New York are going to produce very different wines. But so we've got the Hudson Valley wine region, and then you mentioned Long Island, and then also my parents were recently up in the Finger Lakes, and that's a whole winery scene. Are there marked differences between like the Finger Lakes and Long Island?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You're talking about down in Long Island, you have the ocean.
Mm.
So that puts in a variable. Finger Lakes, you have the lakes. And not only that, and even in the Hudson Valley, if you take, I'm trying to give it was Glory Farm Winery, but now it's Quartz Rock. You take Quartz Rock, I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's up on the side of a mountain. So I believe it's the Seyval or I think it's the Cap Franc that's grown on the bottom. And then if you have the Cap Franc that's grown on the top, it's actually going to be different Cap Francs because the one on the bottom is the valley floor and what's up on the top is up in the mountains. So it might be a little cooler.
So even
So,
the site itself.
even with everything is site specific as well. And within your site,
Wow.
you can have a lot of different variables. So I'll give you another example. I'll use Millbrook Vineyards. There was one year, a couple years ago, we got frost. So there, as you drive up Millbrook, just up the road, just to get in. So the vines that were closer to the road got hit by the frost, but the vines that were closer up, and it's not a very large hill, it's just, or anything, just didn't get frostbite.
Hmm.
So it's just some wild weather does wild things, but also where you have your grapes contributes to what's in the bottle.
That's
So
fascinating. I know that it is science, but it does seem a little bit like alchemy. Like you take some dirt and some seeds and some skins, and then you bottle some magic. It's a
Yeah, but
little
you know what's
magical.
going into that? Not all grapes grow in every soil.
mm,
So when somebody is going to start a winery or saying thinking of growing grapes in their backyard to make their own wine or whatever, you have to have your soil tested to see what grapes will grow well in your soil.
So, as far as you know, in the Hudson Valley, are all of the wineries that are making wine using their own grapes, or are they doing blends where they're sometimes bringing in grapes from other regions?
Well, that's all specific to each winery,
Mhm.
but most all the wineries grow their grapes. They have vineyards, okay, but they also contract out
Mm.
to other vineyards within the Hudson Valley for grapes and also in the Finger Lakes in Long Island. So it really depends on what they're making. Sauvignon Blanc, that is mostly grown in Long Island, and there's some Sauvignon Blanc that live in the Finger Lakes. So if you see a winery that makes a Sauvignon Blanc, they probably got their grapes from Long Island. So it really they do buy from other regions as other regions buy from us as well.
So,
sure.
is the Hudson Valley more red grape friendly?
It's red and white.
Okay.
Both grow very well. Cap Franc is the signature grape of the Hudson Valley. And that was another aha moment. There was with a Wycliffe Cab Franc I tasted and ate a piece of chocolate, and it was like eating a chocolate covered cherry.
Oh,
Nice.
And I'm kind of I really like Cab Franc, and I really prefer East Coast Cab Franc, specifically Hudson Valley, because it has a nice pepper finish, and I love it. And when you drink Cab Franc from, say, California, it's going to be more jammy, more fruity, and it's not going to have that. It'll have that pepper, but it's not going to be as pronounced.
Hmm.
So that's just the difference in areas.
That's
so
fascinating.
fascinating. Okay, so real talk about wine snobbery and gatekeeping.
Okay.
A lot of people who might otherwise enjoy wine don't really get into it because it can be intimidating. Some people definitely find it intimidating. People often think a good wine has to be really pricey and wine trends come and go. Of course, there's the famous story about how sales of Merlot plummeted after Paul Giamatti's character in the really fantastic film Sideways repeatedly dissed Merlot. There's also a lot of vocabulary around regions and varietals and viticulture and everything that we've been talking about here. But we don't have to be sommeliers to enjoy wine, right? Talk to us about
Absolutely not.
yeah, so talk to us about some really entry level, affordable wines, just some simple ways to feel knowledgeable enough to be comfortable buying or ordering wine.
Well, first of all, you drink what you like.
Mm,
And what I like, you might not like. And that's okay. You know, there's been a lot of times I really like a wine and my husband won't, and vice versa. And there's been a lot of times I'll open a $10 bottle, he'll open a more expensive bottle, and my $10 bottle is better than the more expensive bottle. So everybody's palates are different. And your palate kind of mature as you grow in as far as the wines that you like and drink. So maybe not. But so I'd say don't let the price intimidate you. But if you like a $7 bottle, I have some really great bottles of wine and I didn't pay more than like $12 for them. And then I also have some really expensive bottles of wine. Are they better? You really, what are they better from? You know, what are you comparing it to? You're drinking wine for the moment, for the meal, for the celebration, or just at the end of the day at 5 o'clock. And it is what you like. So you shouldn't feel intimidated. And never let anybody say, oh, that's not a good wine, because you know what? That person might like sweet wine, and for them, it's a really good wine. You know, I don't particularly care for sweet wine, although it has its place if I'm eating spicy food, but I'm not going to go out of my way and drink something that's a little sweeter. But if you like that you go right ahead, drink up.
So really, what I hear you saying is it really is such a personal taste. But for somebody just sort of starting to dabble, would say going to like wine tastings. Is that a good way? Like,
Oh,
how would people
definitely.
know what they liked if they're new to this?
I would go out. I would go liquor stores have wine tastings.
Yep.
I would try that. I would go to wineries and try the different wines that they have.
Okay.
And don't be afraid to ask what grapes are in them. You might not know the grape, but if you really like it, it might be something that you look for in another winery that you go to. Now that in the Hudson Valley, there are grapes that are indigenous, they're hybrid grapes in the area because they could take the cold, the hardy cold.
Mhm.
And some of them, they make really good wines. Like Saval Blanc, it's a white wine. And Matt at Ben Morrow has really, really narrowed down the Saval Blanc. It tastes like a Sauvignon Blanc. It was just awesome. But when you walk in and if you only know vinifera grapes like Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, Pinot Grigio, you'll look at a Sauvignon Blanc, oh, what's that? Taste it because you'll be surprised what you like. Don't ever turn your nose up to a grape just because you never heard of it, because it might end up being a grape that you like, and it might end up being a grape indigenous to that region. So you're not going to be able to find it somewhere else.
So what I have always found to be true is that, and I don't have to tell you this, wine people love to talk about wine. You will never meet a wine person who does not want to give you recommendations and ask you what you like. Earlier this spring, last spring, we went to Rose Hill, right? And we ended up getting into a conversation with Matt there at Rose Hill for like 45 minutes because we asked one question, and then he's walking us around the shop and showing us stuff and opening bottles to give us tastes of things. And so one place that I've always had really great experiences is wine shops or, liquor stores. They don't have to be wine specific. If you go in and you say, hey, I want to spend under $15. I don't really like sweet wines. I like red wines a little bit better, and I'm making lasagna. They will give you recommendations. They will let you taste stuff. So it can be really fun. So I think what you're saying is, and more expensive wine's not necessarily better. A good wine is a wine that you think tastes good and that you're going to enjoy. And so I think that if people take that attitude of like, everybody's learning about wine all the time because wine is evolving and changing and there's new kinds of wine that come out. So if you just kind of take that attitude of curiosity and you go into your wine shop, and I've gotten some great wine recommendations from the wine guy who stocked my wine section in my grocery store in Texas. I know we can't get wine at the grocery store in New York, but that guy knew what he was doing. He gave me recipes, pairings, all kinds of ideas. So if you're just willing to say, hey, I know what I like, but I don't know all the vocabulary, people are so excited to help you with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I at the restaurant that I own, I'm in there and people ask me one question about wine and it comes out to be a 15-minute conversation. And I'm like, let me get you back to your food.
Yeah. So are there any, I know you have relationships all over the Hudson Valley, and so you don't want to pick a few over the others, but are there any wine shops that really come to mind where there's a lot of that kind of hands-on learning, or some of your favorite places to go tasting?
Yes. Boutique Wines and Spirits in Fishkill. It's by Walmart. I highly recommend Paige. She is just awesome. She has a big wine background. She used to work years ago for a distributor. She knows her wine. She has a lot of local Hudson Valley products in her liquor store. So you can find a lot of local wines there, local spirits. And she also has a cider bar in the back.
Yeah.
And with local cider, regional cider. She is phenomenal. Her and her brother run it. And I highly recommend. And you don't have to spend a lot of money for a bottle of wine. And then Paige, her liquor store is just really, really good. And, a lot of craft distillers, small batch distilling she's got, if you like spirits and bourbon. And she's just a wealth of knowledge. And I highly recommend going into Boutique Wines and Spirits.
All right. Valley Girls, next field trip, we're going to Fishkill.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You should get Paige on the show.
Oh, yeah. That'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be so great.
I will acknowledge, just for anybody who's listening to this and they're like, okay, wine is great, but when are you guys going to talk about beer? We're not. And maybe that's something that Paige could come back and talk to us about. Because I know you also mentioned in the title of your book, breweries. I have never learned to like beer. Jenny is gluten-free, so we're not beer drinkers at
There's some
all.
good breweries in the Hudson Valley.
I know that there are, but so we're going to have to get a guest on here. So our other Valley girl, Rebecca, she knows how to appreciate beer. So maybe we'll get Paige to come on to talk about the brewery scene, and we'll get Rebecca to do
I'm
the
not,
interview.
yeah, she doesn't have beer in her store. It's just
Oh, okay.
plain spirits and cider.
Right.
All right.
Right. And my husband, Matt, too, he and his best friend, they have gone to like all the craft breweries in the Hudson Valley. And
Yeah.
there really is such a huge scene for that, for sure. So
Let's get
yeah.
Rebecca and Matt to do the beer episode, because
That's
I
right.
can't even fake excitement about beer. I get very excited about wine. I'm excited to talk about cider. I'm excited to talk about gin if we've got some of that going on in the Hudson Valley, but beer, I can't.
As an aside, I will say that from another fellow celiac disease person that I know, that she just told me that Corona beer has been tested for under 20 parts per million, which is the cutoff for it being gluten-free. So even though there is barley in beer, there are certain beers that aren't labeled gluten-free, but by testing them and through the distilling process, that they can be considered gluten-free. And she is super sensitive. Like, she will get sick immediately if she has any bit of gluten, and she drinks Corona. So I will say that I had a Corona recently, and as much as I was never a huge beer person, after not having it for so long, I had a pizza and a beer, and it was like the best thing I had ever had in my life. It has been years since I had a good beer. And I know there's decent gluten-free or gluten-reduced beers out there, but just to have a real beer and a slice of pizza, let me tell you, that was, of course, gluten-free pizza, but it was pretty amazing. So
bet.
in addition to beer, we'd love to move on to talk more about cider and spirits.
All right. So I am no Hudson Valley wine goddess, but I am slightly more knowledgeable about wine than I am about cider. I don't know much about cider other than that it comes from fermented apples and that I like it. So talk to us about cider, the whole cider scene.
The whole cider evolution. What's funny is when I got into all this stuff with the region, the only person really producing the cider was the Ward Valley Winery. They produced Stock's hard cider. And this is years ago, decades ago. But now there are just so many cideries in the Hudson Valley. And also the Hudson Valley is a huge, huge apple producer. So it really makes sense. And just like wineries, every cidery is different. Every cidery has their special ways of making things. And no cider is going to be the same when you go from one cidery to another. But there's cideries all over, from the top, just south of Albany, all the way down to Warwick. And they're good. I would definitely highly suggest going and stopping in wherever you may be. And even like Quartz Rock has a cider arm now, and their cider, and I'm not a huge cider person, but their cider won best at the Hudson Valley Wine Competition. And it was really good. I think it was a dry cider. But I know I was like, kudos to them. And down in the southern part, you have Applewood Winery that has Naked Flock cider. And then you have all these cideries also all over. You have Bad Seed cider, you have Kettleborough cider, you have Brooklyn Cider House. I mean, there's just so many cideries.
Two things that I like about cider is, one, as previously mentioned, I am very much not a beer drinker. And so if you're out someplace and it's a beer place, it's nice to have cider as an option. Like, I think I had a cider maybe when we went to Keegan Ale. And another thing about cider is it feels more tryable because it's often easy to just get a can of a cider to try. So I feel like it feels like less of a commitment than buying a bottle of wine to try. So cider tasting is kind of fun. It seems like they're easier.
Really interesting. I would suggest going on some cidery tours because it's really interesting. And with the apples that they use, some of them are apples that you've heard about, and some of them are like, what kind of apple is that?
I am always fascinated by that because it's no surprise that we have a great cider scene, considering, like you mentioned, all of the local apple orchards in the area. But it still just blows my mind when I love this, when you can get like just like a flight of wine, you get a flight of ciders, and to hear the names of these apples that I had never heard of before.
Right.
Has been very cool. And I love that that's popping up more and more, whether, like Jen said, it's for the gluten-free folk or people who don't drink beer. or whatever it is. It's just another option. And we certainly are not limited with apples here in the Hudson Valley. So
Yeah.
that is very, very big.
And there are a lot of indigenous cider apples that are grown in the orchards.
Mm.
Yeah. And in this area.
So if we want to do cidery tours, obviously we know apple picking, apple harvest season is the fall. So is that the time of year to go to the cideries too, or are they making stuff year round?
I think that they harvest the same time. Apples are harvested in the
Mhm.
fall. So that's when they're making their cider.
Okay.
I would go anytime to a cidery, just like you go anytime to a winery. It depends what you go in the fall, you're gonna probably see them in process making what they're making. But I would definitely, if you're out doing an afternoon of tour somewhere and you pass a cidery, I would definitely stop in.
Okay. Okay.
So
Yeah. Well, I'd love to.
twist her arm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, okay, you left this winery. Look, there's a cidery.
Yes.
Excellent. You know?
And I just love the ambiance and the whole area and just seeing the land and the orchards. It's so beautiful. It
And
really is.
everybody takes such pride in what they're producing,
Mhm.
whether, no matter what it is, whether it's wine, cider, spirit, beer, they all take pride in what they're doing.
Yeah.
That
You
feels
know,
like, that
so-
feels like a very Hudson Valley thing, but it's also been the case at any winery in the country or in the world that I've ever gone to.
Yep.
It's such a rare opportunity to go someplace and talk to the producers. Like the people, they literally had their fingers in the dirt and now they're in the bar pouring it into your glass. And, like I said, they will be more than happy to talk to you about it for the next 3 hours and answer all the questions you have because you're tasting their passion in that glass. And that's what's so neat about going to a winery or a cidery or whatever and seeing the producers instead of just going and buying it in the store, which is also fine. As Ina Garten says, store-bought is fine. But it really is a treat to be able to go to the place where things are being produced.
Yes. And see the tanks and see the
Yeah.
equipment.
Yeah. It's amazing. So what about the hard stuff? Are people making whiskey, vodka, gin?
Oh, yeah.
What's going on locally with distilleries?
There's a lot of distilleries popping up. There's a new one, 10 Mile, which is out, I believe, in Wassaic. And there's good stuff. Hill Rock, they make some incredible bourbon that's up in Columbia County. Yeah, Columbia County. Beautiful place. I actually, years ago, went up there for a tour and everything, and it was pretty amazing. And their stuff was pretty amazing. You have Tuttletown Spirits, which makes, what's it, New York bourbon, whatever the bourbon is, and they're pretty popular. Stout Ridge is another winery and distillery. They make bourbon, and what's really interesting with the malt house and how they spread the malts, and it's, I really highly recommend going on a tour because it's really, I don't drink bourbon, but it's interesting to see how it's made.
That is my husband's drink. He has gotten into bourbon in the last year, loves his old fashions, but now he's drinking bourbon neat. And it's amazing how many different, he loves the local ones. And my mom and I are big craft fair people. We go to all the craft fairs around. And of course, we see the art and the craft. And we're like, all right, time to get to the samples, the food and the drink
craft
samples,
beverages.
the beverages. And it's not just wine samples anymore.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable what
Yeah.
you see. And I wish I could remember the name of it off the top of my head, but there was one where it was very interesting. They couldn't call it a bourbon because of the very specific, obviously the process that was into making bourbon, but whatever grain they were using, they were able to use to make something so similar to bourbon. And they had to call it a vodka, but it was really tasted like a bourbon. It's just
Oh, that's interesting.
fascinating. It's so
That's
fascinating
interesting.
what they can do now.
Harvest Spirits up in Columbia County, they make really good. I like their vodka.
Mm.
Like I said, I'm not a bourbon drinker, but there's some really good bourbons in the area. Some really good stuff.
All right. So asking for myself, what about local gin? I like a gin.
Warwick Valley Distillery makes a nice gin. It smells beautiful.
Okay. Okay. So we're doing our very first book club with our friend Candace, who owns the Book and Nook in Warwick, and we're going to be doing the event at Silvio's Villa. So we're going to be in Warwick. So we're adding Warwick Valley Distillery to our agenda, Jenny, for when we are over there.
Yes.
Because I would love to check out a local
I
gin.
like that idea.
Okay.
It was great. All
The
right.
botanicals in it smelled really good.
Mm.
I feel like this is the kind of episode where people are going to have more questions than answers after they listen to it. So if people are like, hey, you didn't ask her about this, or you didn't mention this whiskey that's over here, or this bourbon, or whatever, maybe we'll get you to come back, or we'll get a bunch of people from other distilleries to come back. We could even do like a live stream and people can ask all their questions.
Sure.
Who knows?
Sure.
Who knows?
I'm
But
game.
I feel like people are going to be like, you didn't mention this one. And
Yeah, there's so many. We'd be here for hours and hours if I had to go through and talk about every single one. And it's always evolving. There's wineries, distilleries, cideries, breweries, all coming online, going offline, different things. But like I said, I feel that the Hudson Valley is like a craft beverage mega. It really is.
are there events or winery tours or things that are family friendly? Obviously, 21 and up to drink, but if you're just looking to spend a nice spring day at a winery, are there places that the whole family can go?
I would say Rivera Winery is the winery that I know and feel that is the most family friendly.
Is that the one we went to?
I was just going to say that's the one I took you to. Yes. What
Okay.
was it?
Yes, and there were kids playing out on the lawn. There's a lot.
That was
Yeah.
St. Patrick's Day. It was St. Patrick's
Yes.
Day last year. That
Yes,
we
they're
went there.
very, very
Yes.
Mhm.
children friendly.
Yeah. There was
Yeah.
live music and the kids were playing outside. There's
Yeah.
tons of outdoor area. There was, I think there was even
Yes.
like stuff for them to climb on. So
Yeah,
that was
there
nice.
was.
Yeah. And I would say if you're going to bring your children out wine tasting or your dog, definitely call the winery
Mm.
to find out if they are kid friendly and dog friendly.
Mm.
Because that winery, distillery, brewery is kid friendly.
That's fair. That's fair.
Hmm.
I think I remember people having kids and dogs when we were at Rose Hill also.
So I was going to mention that one as well. Rose Hill and Red Hook is absolutely family friendly, dog friendly. Yes. I'm not so sure inside, but like just in general, it is very
Mhm.
friendly.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of kids there when we went to Rose Hill. That's right.
And if you're going to bring your kids to a winery, make sure you watch them so they don't end
Yes.
up in the pond. Yeah.
But
Yeah, just because they're open to you bringing your kids doesn't
Yeah.
mean it's all right.
yeah. Maybe that's
Yeah.
more of a buying to take home day and less of a doing the full tasting day when you take your kids with you.
It depends. Outdoors, it really depends on the winery.
Yeah.
And I know there's some breweries and wineries, they have kids' toys so they can. And I remember a brief story. I was in Virginia wine tasting. My kids were young. They were probably, I don't know, 6 and 8. And we went into this winery and it was just us and an older couple. And the older couple like shot us this look, oh my God, going on this wine tour. So we did the whole wine tour. At the end of the wine tour, the owner says, does anyone have any questions? And my son raises his hand. And the guy's like, what's your question? He says, how do you know when the grapes are ready to pick?
Ah,
And at that point, the
proud
guy's like,
mama
"That's a
moment.
great question. I was a proud mama. And the older couple then started talking to us and were snubbing us. When we went back into the tasting room, we had brought stuff for our kids to play with. They went over to the table. They sat there doing whatever they were doing. And we were at the tasting bar, tasting with this other couple. So just, it's not a free for all. Just make sure you come with things to do for your kids in case there's not activities at the wineries for your children.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a very cultural thing too, because to even ask that question here, you wouldn't even think to ask that question, say, in certain areas in Europe. It's just part of the culture there. I mean,
Right.
kids, I know, first of all, drinking age is lower, but it's not even about the drinking age. My
Right.
family from way back, they all came from Europe, and it was just a thing. Everybody had a sip of wine. Even if it was a little thimbleful, they all had a sip of wine or whatever everybody was drinking. My mom, who just grew up in Brooklyn, was just like whatever her parents were drinking. They had a little bit, and it was not
Right.
a thing. I also think it's important.
Explain some things about Ellen, if I'm being
Does
honest.
explain some things, right? My mom loves her wine and her liquors. Love you, Ma. So I also think it's really great to show how to be a responsible drinker too. Like it's
Yes.
not just Animal House and frat parties and all of this. There is,
Right.
which by the way, I will give a shout out to my son's fraternity because they have wine Wednesdays. So instead of it, they actually have somebody come in and teach them about wines, and they've learned about wines and
Oh,
they
that's nice.
appreciate it now. And they all drink wine on Wednesdays, which I think is hilarious
That
and
is
great.
so bougie and funny, actually.
I know, I love it. So, but it really is so important. We never made in my house, I know everybody's different, but in my house, it was never like that big of a deal. It's not like we had like locked in a liquor cabinet. I trusted my kids. We talked about
Right.
the
Mhm.
responsibility of it, all of that. But taking them to a winery, taking them to distilleries, also just seeing that it can be a family thing. If you go to Italy and you say this is just part of the culture there. And I
Yeah.
think that it's really important to show that it can be enjoyed responsibly. And that's something for kids to see.
Yeah. And I think when you go out wine tasting, if you're going to go to more than one winery in a day, when they give you a pour and it's a tasting, don't feel obligated just to drink the whole thing. It's a tasting. You're there to taste it. You swirl it around your mouth. You can bring a solo cup to spit in it because,
Yes.
and they have buckets, but you don't want to be going over into the spit bucket. Bring a solo cup with you and
Yes.
spit into the solo cup, and then dump the solo cup into the spit bucket and do that as you travel because
I think that's
that,
really important, and I think that that's another thing I was gonna say is also showing, like, when we have brought my kids, we've always made sure that one of us is the responsible driver
Mhm.
and not drinking as much,
Mhm.
whether it's not tasting as much or using a spit bucket or a cup. Also showing, again, that's part of the drinking responsibly
Mhm.
is not overindulging and also knowing when you have to be the responsible one and you're the designated driver. So
Right.
we'll put this disclaimer out there for all of the talk about tours and wineries and distilleries. We do want to say make sure that you have some designated driver, or if some people do, they get a limo for the day or they get a
Yeah.
driver for the day and they make sure of that ahead of time. So don't find yourself in a situation where you've gone on this fun winery tour and now okay we gotta get home. So always make sure of that ahead of time. And I just watched something recently with some sommelier and she was saying how she has her own cup that she has to spit
Mhm.
in. Somebody asked why, and that was the explanation. She said if I actually drank every single tasting in a day, she said I'd
Yeah.
be drunk within the first hour or two. So yeah, you have to be careful with that.
I'm the same way. I go to tastings in the city all the time, and I come with my solo cup, my spit cup, because I just can't. You just can't. There's just
Right.
so
It's
many
important.
wines to taste, and that's what you're doing is you're tasting.
Yes.
You're tasting to see if you like it, to see if you're going to buy it, to see if you're going to put it in your cellar, whatever the case is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I also love the story about your son asking that very basic question of
Yeah.
how do you know when the grapes are ready to pick? Because I feel like that takes us back to what we were talking about in the beginning. Wine is supposed to be fun. You're not
Mhm.
you're not getting your wine certification unless you are. Maybe you're studying to become a sommelier, in which case you're probably way beyond what we're talking about here already. So it's meant to be fun. And so I feel like if you can approach it with that childlike curiosity when you go to a restaurant or you go to a wine shop or you go to a tasting and you're willing to just be like, hey, I don't know if this is a stupid question, but I don't know and I want to learn. And
There's
having
no
that
stupid question.
attitude, you'll enjoy yourself so much more than thinking there's a certain way to enjoy wine.
There is no stupid question. And wine is always evolving. Things are changing all the time. So never be afraid to ask what whatever the question is. And don't be intimidated if other people are around you and
Yeah.
you feel like, oh my God, screw it. You don't know and you want to know
Yeah.
and ask.
All right. So tell us about the Hudson Valley Wine Festival and any other big wine events or fun places that we can go to learn more or maybe find you.
I think the Hudson Valley Wine Festival is the premier wine festival in the Hudson Valley. I host the Hudson Valley Wine Competition there on Saturday morning before the festival starts. It goes a little bit into when the festival opens as well. But there you're going to have a lot of regional wines,
Mm.
New York wines, as not just Hudson Valley. There's spirits, there's cideries, there's beer. There's something for everyone there. That, to me, I think is the premier wine festival. There's festivals that go on all throughout the valley, throughout the year. Wineries, they have their own events. So if you like winery, I would get on their mailing list because they have events, festivals. I think this past weekend at Millbrook, they had a whole entire portfolio tasting with all their holdings, both here and California and Italy. So get on that mailing list because everyone has their own events as well.
That's a good tip. So the Hudson Valley Wine Festival is open to the public. You don't have to be in the trade.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's open to the public, and I think the tickets are on sale now, and you can get them at a really good price. It's always the weekend after Labor Day,
Okay.
Saturday and Sunday.
I'm Googling it right now. So it's actually the Hudson Valley Wine and Food Fest, which makes it even more
Yeah.
appealing to me. It is Saturday, September 6th and Sunday, September 7th at the Dutchess County Fairgrounds. And yeah, you can go ahead and get tickets for it right now. You can even get VIP tickets. I don't know
Is that
what
for next year?
Yeah,
Is
this
that
is the
dates?
2025. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Oh. VIP, early access, skip the line entrance, expedited wine pickup, VIP refreshment tent. All right. All right.
And if you're going to go there, make sure you bring your own spit cup because there are so many wines to taste.
Good advice.
And you don't want to be leaving there drunk because the cops are right there. So
And I'm glad that they are, frankly.
Yeah,
That's-
and it's not safe.
yeah,
Absolutely.
just bring a spit cup.
Okay. And you said that you do a educational piece in the beginning of that festival.
Okay, so on Saturdays I do educational piece. Usually it's around 2:00
Okay.
because the wine competition is from 9 to noon.
Oh,
then-
that was what it was. The competition.
yeah.
Okay.
And usually when the festival opens at 11, people will come in and see the end of the wine competition, where we're really going down to the nitty gritty, where we're voting on the best wines of Hudson Valley. So
Okay. And is that wine competition open to the public as well, or is that just for industry?
it's just for Hudson Valley wineries and
Okay.
cideries and distilleries. It has to be made in the Hudson Valley with it can be made with New York fruit and then Hudson Valley fruit.
Gotcha.
You're the first non-chef listed on their website. We've got a bunch of chefs, and then there's Debbie. That's
That's
very cool.
fantastic.
So what kind of educational opportunities are there at the festival? There's workshops and tastings.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
They have chefs do chef demos.
Mm.
And I usually do talk about wine and usually have samples to go with it and stuff. So I don't know what I'm talking about next year. I'm trying to remember what I talked about this year. I can't even remember. Oh, I think it was could have had to do with Cab Franc. Might have had to do with Cab Franc. I've done so many. I've done rosés. I've done hybrids. I've done
Rosés.
grapes that are grown in the Hudson Valley, because recently there's been some new plantings of grapes that are now have reached to the point where they're being bottled, like Bruner Veltliner. Millbrook is doing a Bruner Veltliner. And I see what's going on and go from there.
So fun.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I know. Well, all right. I'm just gonna make a bold statement right now that we will see you there, because
Yes.
I am putting September 6th and 7th on my radar. That looks like a lot of fun.
Another Valley Girls field trip. We'll be there. I love it. This has been fantastic, Debbie. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Now I know it's not 5:00 yet, but now I want to go drink a glass of wine.
I know. I was just thinking we should have scheduled this for like 6 p.m. because I am so ready for like a nice glass of red and a piece of chocolate now.
I know. I will say, of all the wine tastings, I think some of the funniest ones were during COVID, when you couldn't go to places. And so they would put out the list ahead of time, and you would go and you'd have to buy, obviously, the whole bottle, but you would go and buy the bottle, and then they'd do these wine tastings. And I would do it with my sister-in-law, with my mom. We just had so much fun with it. And it's, even if you can't all be in the same place, Zoom wine tastings can be a lot of fun. Just gonna say. You don't have to drive anywhere either. You're already there.
Right.
Great.
That's the best kind.
All right. Well, Debbie, thank you. We really appreciate you being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you guys for having me. And if anybody has any questions, they can find me online at HudsonValleyWineGoddess.com.
Perfect.
Awesome. We'll put links on the episode page. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. All right,
Bye.
take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for listening. Please like and subscribe, rate and review, because as we know, it all helps tremendously. Do you love the Valley Girls? Tell a friend. Have ideas for the podcast? Tell us. The easiest way to chat with us is our Facebook group, Valley Girls Podcast Pod Squad, or you can contact us through our website, valleygirlspodcast.com, where you can also sign up for our newsletter so you never miss a thing. And of course, we're on Instagram at valleygirlspodny. We can't wait to hear from you. Oh, and do you love our theme music as much as we do? The music for this episode is by Robert Burke Warren, entitled Painting a Vast Blue Sky, and can be found on his album Redheaded Friend, available on iTunes and Spotify, and at the link in the show notes. Bye for now.